For today's installment, we look somewhat closer to home, or at the very least, those majority of my readers who are mammals do, in that we turn our nervous and wary gaze to another member of class Mammalia. It is, however, a member which is about as far removed from us, and indeed almost all other mammals as presently exists, in the form of Australia's Echidna, or Spiny Anteater, and more particularly, the part of that form which can confidently be considered one of the world's most terrifying penises! The Echidna is one of only two remaining genuses of animals left in a family of mammals known as monotremes. Natural selection long since selected all other members of this family for extinction, and to this day only echidnas and platypuses continue to spit in the eye of the world and continue to exist in spite of this clearly expressed desire of nature that they no longer inflict themselves upon the rest of us. Monotremes are essentially extremely primitive mammals with traits which it is theorized that the very earliest of mammals, back when we were just beginning to differentiate ourselves from our reptilian brethren, must have had. As a consequence, they retain many reptile traits which the rest of us have long since turned our backs on in disgust. They don't have nipples, for example. These are far too advanced and civilized for the low-born beasts such as these. No, they just sweat out their milk from their sweat glands and expect their young to lap it up as it messes their coats. As with reptiles, they lay eggs which contain their young, and in the process of producing these young, they employ penises which, unlike the rest of the mammal class, but like many reptiles, have multiple heads. However, whereas reptiles on the whole have the modesty and relative decency to stop at no more than 2 heads for their penises, the flamboyant and whimsical echidna decides to 1-up or perhaps 2-up their scaly brethren, and jump the shark entirely with a 4-headed penis. Why 4? What possible use could they possibly derive from such an arrangement? It's difficult to say, and perhaps reason doesn't even really come into it. These are, after all, Australian animals, and Australia is notorious for producing all sorts of ridiculous bullshit. This is a country where the introduction of rabbits has proven to be an ecological catastrophe which the natural world could not sustain. This is an ecosystem which produced koalas, a creature which has perfectly functional thumbs, which could be used to grip tree branches, but which went to the trouble of evolving a second, seemingly superfluous pseudo-thumb used only for climbing, and which, if that pseudo-thumb is broken, will starve to death, rather than using its real thumb to climb to the eucalyptus leaves it needs to live. This is, in short, not an ecology which one can take very seriously. Regardless of the whys and wherefores, the fact remains that the echidna has a 4-headed dick, and in typically impractical and stupid Australian fashion, only ever uses one of these heads at a time. And while this may seem to make the comparison between echidna sex and the ancient art of fisting somewhat less striking, the visual component of this comparison remains intact. The echidna penis is somewhat prehensile and staggeringly large in proportion to the rest of its body, and as a result of which, the erect echidna dick is rather reminiscent of a slender, boneless arm, pink and shiny as though flayed of all of its skin, extending up out of the depths of this spiny beast with 4 stubby pink fingers reaching, grasping at you, as though trying to wrap you in their warm, moist grip, only then to ejaculate out of the tips of these 4 fingers, though only one at a time, from whose turgid, muscular grasp you vainly fight to free yourself. And oh yes, let us speak of that ejaculate for a moment or two, if we might. Those of my generation will be familiar with Transformers, those delightful vehicle-cum-robots whose animated adventures so distracted and pacified us in the mid-1980s. In particular, I draw your attention to Devastator, a robot made up of many smaller robots who combine together to form one mechanical behemoth of fearsome mane and proportion, far stronger than any of his contemporaries. Now imagine for a moment if, rather than being made up of purple and green robots, Devastator were made of echidna sperm. No, I do not inflict this image upon your brains in the hope of fan art being created of it, though I would be sublimely happy if this were an ancillary consequence of my actions, but rather to make clear the reason why it is that, upon entering the female echidna's vagina, the sperm of the male combine together into an odd drill-like configuration which combine the speed and strength of the component sperm into one unstoppable super sperm. For reasons which are not entirely understood, several of these super sperm configurations will emerge amongst the ejaculate produced during a given mating, and each team, or giant robot, if you will, of these sperm will compete against each other in order to get to the sole available ova first. Once they have done so, it's every sperm for itself, as they compete in a manner which is at least comfortingly familiar to those of us accustomed to the usual mammalian manner of reproduction, although this impression is betrayed not long afterwards, as this familiar process is subverted by the production of a small goddamn fucking mammalian egg a short time later. While it is impossible to now say for certain what similarities in total the modern monotremes have with our own primitive ancestors, and even our best educated guesses remain only that, it is safe to at least say that whatever similarities do exist provide ample justification for our ancestors to have branched off and washed their primitive paws of the appalling reproductive practices of these disgusting egg-laying monstrosities. And this provides us all, I think, one more reason to take pride in the evolutionary path which has led us to our present condition, and a sigh of satisfaction at the knowledge that when the world conspired to wipe all of the other monotremes out, we had made the right choice. And now, in the manner of a family who decides it inappropriate to discuss the one relative with Down syndrome in public, let us agree never to mention these embarrassing relations ever again, consigning them instead to a life of dignified solitude in the attic of the family home, where they can never mortify us in front of guests again.